Hello and welcome to my channel, Iuno Gaming. It's been a while since we've done a Wuthering Waves tier list, so in today's video we're finally going to revisit this topic, and this time I've come armed to the teeth with math. So what is this video going to be based on? It is going to be based on a bunch of team calculations that, I went to the boys and I was like, hey, let's make some team calcs for every single featured 5-star characters in Wuthering Waves. So huge shout out to and thanks to Catalyst Online, who did most of these calcs, as well as most of the calcs in most of my videos, as well as to the people that help him: Low Priority, Sweat Drops, and Pride Win. Now, let's talk a bit about this tier list. As I mentioned, this tier list is focused on 5-star featured resonators. So this is, it's not really going to take into consideration 4-star characters, because people tend to get those, for free and stuff. And also, we're not going to be focusing on, for example, the standard banner 5-star characters either. This list is more so going to be focused on which character should you consider pulling for based on, what math that we can base it off of. Summer might be winding down, but Snowbreak Containment Zone is heating things up with its biggest update ever. Snowbreak is a 3D anime waifu shooter, and after this massive update, it'll be an even better 3D anime waifu shooter with more swimsuits. The swimsuit event drops the most content in Snowbreak history: Fenny's Sunset Sweep, Cirrus's Azure Drift, Narita's Sunspray Surge, and Vidya's Aqua Mirage. You can interact with your squad at the brand new Breeze Hard Bay, play the Frosty Toss-Up minigame, soak in hot springs, or even chill at the dorms and bar. And don't miss the free limited time AR encounter where the girls literally appear in your world. Just make sure to do it in private. Of course, this update isn't only about swimsuits. Snowbreak delivers a relaxing but satisfying shooter experience. Mow down enemies with gorgeous skills, simple controls, and cross-platform play on PC, iOS, Android, Steam, and Epic. It's free to download and quite free-to-play friendly. Daily tasks only take 1 minute, and every update gives out a free limited SSR character with a 100% chance to pull featured characters. And right now is the best time to start I'm playing, where new players can get up to 120 free pulls, 3 free SSR characters, and 3 outfits, including Cirrus and Freefin just for logging in. Plus, there's a brand new prologue to catch you up on the story. So what are you waiting for? Smash that link down below to try out Snowbreak Containment Zone and blast your way through the hottest summer update yet. Huge thanks to Snowbreak Containment Zone for sponsoring today's video. Now, the next thing is that these calculations, we're going to include their ideal team as well as a more free-to-play friendly team. For example, looking at Carlotta here, we've got some calcs for her with Judge and Shorekeeper, as well as a 2-cost calc with, for example, Tauchi and Verena instead. And the reality is, with HP values just going up and up in Tower of Adversity, as well as needing 3 fully geared to the teeth endgame teams effectively, as well as kind of like a 4th team to clear out some of the junk, Tower is, not the same walk in the park as it used to be, and we do actually need to consider team DPS a bit more than we used to. So I figured this was a pretty decent time to give a bit of advice and guidance for this purpose. Now, as mentioned, these are of course team calcs, and I will be basing, I guess, their ranking based on the character's best team. So sometimes you have to take that into consideration. Well, maybe these characters are a bit better as a standalone character, which we will talk a bit about as well. And we are going to be assuming slightly above average player skill. I'd say the average player, if you include like the median player for this game, I mean, they probably don't even watch guide videos on, Wuthering Waves to even learn proper rotations. So we are assuming a player that, is able to do proper rotations, but isn't really that comfortable or doesn't really have the time to grind perfect quick swap rotations and min-max everything. Look, they've got a job, they've got a girlfriend, maybe a kid. Okay, let me know if you guys have a girlfriend, and they've got stuff to do, so they can't just be spending all their time optimizing a rotation. So we got to take that into consideration when we make recommendations for people. Now, there are a few parameters for this list. One is that this is going to be based on Sequence 0 Refinement 1 signature weapons for the DPS characters. I decided to normalize that aspect of it because otherwise, there's just way too much variations, and this is a starting point. Perhaps as time goes on, we can adjust the list, and if you guys find this list helpful or interesting in terms of the calcs and stuff, let us know, and we might be motivated to make more of them. Now, the other caveat is that Shorekeeper and Verena when they are on these teams, they're simply using the variation catalyst, and the cost is based on how many featured 5 stars are on their team. For example, if you have Augusta with her signature weapon, that costs 2 worth 5-star featured worth of pulls roughly. And of course, there are a few more disclaimers worth going through. This is not going to be focused on, for example, the utility that characters bring to gameplay modes like Wuthering Waves. I might mention it here and there, but overall that's not the focus of this. This is more focused on just team DPS output. Then, needless to say, this is not a perfect or even, a great comparison between teams. Now, as for some disclaimers, these team calcs are not intended as an end-all be-all comparison, but simply one reference for team damage. Different teams excel in different situations. Just because one team is better than another team based on these calcs does not mean that that team is always or actually better than whatever teams they ranked higher than. There are certainly mistakes in the calcs and countless ways to optimize, but we did our best to provide some sort of basis of comparison. Please take everything with a giant grain of salt and use your own best judgment. Now, with all that yapping out of the way, we are going to stop with the cream of the crop, the top dogs in terms of team DPS output, and we actually have the top team as the 100% DPS baseline for this chart. And yeah, we're gonna hop on over to my goofy colorful charts and we can see here that the Cartethyia, Ciaccona, as well as Rover Arrow team here ranks supreme in terms of sheet team DPS, and they are just a bit higher than, for example, Augusta's team with Iuno as well as Shorekeeper. But this is going to be the top 10% teams where, these characters are between 90% and 100% of the best team's damage in the game. What's interesting about the Cartethyia team is that it is also a bit lower in cost. However, you do have to use Arrow Rover, which I gotta be honest, I do not like using Arrow Rover. The character has issues to say the least. At least I feel like they have issues. But, as you can see, this team is going to be the baseline, and I don't think people are going to be surprised that these are the two top teams, Cartethyia as well as Ciaccona, being obviously incredible characters with each other. And this is also important to note, is that we are, in this case, putting these characters here in this tier based on their best team. So for example, would Ciaccona be a character you would pull without Cartethyia or some of her other good teams? Honestly, probably not. But, with that in mind, we are taking a look at their best teams in this case. And next we have Augusta, Iuno, and Shorekeeper. No one's surprised to see, I think, the three of them up here. Augusta recently released DPS character, one of the best in the game, and she also feels great to use. We have Iuno as well, one of my personal favorite characters, I would say. I think she's absolutely fantastic, and she's also a jack of all trades, providing a ton of utility for the team. And finally, we have Shorekeeper, who is, you're going to see her a lot on this list, but at the very least, in terms of her very top team, she's also part of one of the best teams in the game with Augusta as well as Iuno. Next, we've got the 80 to 90%er teams, and there are 3 teams that fall into this category. First, we have Frolova, Cantarella, as well as Rocha, and this team will absolutely murder Wuthering Waves. But in terms of even for just tower viability and just like, DPS checks and how much damage they can output in terms of their overall DPS, this team is going to be one of the better ones, although Rocha is definitely one of the more interchangeable characters on this list. Do keep in mind, though, that we are talking about a 6-cost team, which definitely makes this, of course, a bigger investment. And you may have noticed that in this Augusta, Shorekeeper team, that Shorekeeper only counts as 1 cost here. And this is, in this case, we have Shorekeeper and Verena using variation, so that's why they are only at 1 cost. When typically, obviously if they had their signatures, or if Shorekeeper had her signature, she'd be a 2-cost character in this case. But the next couple teams actually really surprised me, with one of them being my man Gian. And of course, he is definitely getting a bit wheelchaired here by Iuno as well as Ciaccona, but it is great to see him as one of the older characters having a new incredible team. And personally, out of the teams I used with Iuno, this is one of my personal favorites. I have a strong bias towards him because one nice thing I really like about Gian is that no matter how rusty I am at this game, like, oh, I forgot how Frolova Cantarella's rotation works. Oh, I can just throw in Gian. I remember him as super simple, super easy. So yeah, that is one benefit of Gian, is that he is just such an easy character to pick up and play. And for him to be currently in the top, one of the top 4 teams here is absolutely fantastic. Him being such an old character as well. But the issue is in terms of like, for example, pull value, that's when, you know, like you don't really pull him in today's day and age when you've got characters like main DPS Iuno here that is doing nearly as well at a lower cost as well with, for example, Rover Arrow. So just keep all that stuff in mind when I mention this stuff. And you can see obviously like this does not mean this is a blessing to go pull Gian. No, it's not. But if you do have him, you have some hope for him. Now, let's move on to the next tier, which is the 70 to 80% gang, Carlotta, Judge, and Shorekeeper in this tier. And still, this team still feels absolutely fantastic to use. They tend to be able to handle whatever you need them to, you know, whatever you need them to handle for the most part, except for maybe some of the most difficult things in the center tower. You might struggle a bit, but they can definitely handle the side tower stuff for sure. And up next, we actually, I'm a bit surprised to see her, I guess, down technically this low, but we've got Zani, Iuno, and Phoebe here. And Zani and Phoebe, you know, when they were released, I would say they felt like the next kind of level of DPS. Although really on paper, it looks like Carlotta here was actually kept up. So not as much power creep as expected. But in this case, we are assuming Iuno with Zani team. However, you of course don't need Iuno. And in fact, if you just use Spectre Rover or something, you are at just about roughly the same amount of performance. So that is good to see. You know, Zani still pretty powerful main DPS character. And we've actually here, we're seeing one of our first low cost teams with Augusta, Mortefi, and Shorekeeper only costing 3. In this case, Augusta, you know, SCR1, Shorekeeper costing 1 as well. So definitely one of the highest performing low cost teams on this list. Then we've got the Fusion crew with Brant, Lupa, and Chongli. And Chongli, again, is one of those characters who kind of like Gian, who's like, you know, super ancient. We've got Grandpa and Grandma here trying to make their way into the meta. But fortunately, that is one nice thing about Wuthering Waves and the way they release characters, is that they do release characters that elevate older characters. Like, for example, Lupa was a great pull if you had Chongli, so is Brant as well. And personally though, I have a feeling that if they release a new Fusion DPS character, the first character that's going to go is Chongli. But yeah, we'll just... it's good to still see her being, you know, viable in the 70 to 80% gang. And next we've got a Gian team without, you know, a bit lower cost with Shorekeeper instead of, for example, a Ciaccona up here. And this team doesn't really add anyone to this tier, but you can see how, for example, with Gian, Iuno, Shorekeeper, now this team is not nearly as good as, for example, with Ciaccona instead. Now, we've had a big reveal of a lot of characters in the 60 to 70% of the top meta DPS character gang. And interestingly though, only 2 characters were added to this based on their best teams. So this is the first time that these characters were featured anywhere, you know, in any of these teams. Those 2 characters being Camellia and Jinshi. But we can see as we start to make less optimal combinations of characters, like for example, Encore here instead of Chongli, you can see it drops a few percentage points. But yeah, I mean, that's another point that I want to make with Chongli, is that you've got free-to-play options like Encore, Chuxia as well, that make Chongli kind of a low pull value for your account. Unless you got her swimsuit, then she's a great pull value. Can you buy her swimsuit without buying her? I actually have no idea, but if that's something you want, then yeah, you could go for it. But anyway, we can see here that as we get into typically lower cost teams, although a couple of them are a bit higher cost, like for example, Camellia's cost here, we've got a 5 cost team, pretty low performing, all things considered. And I gotta be honest, I personally don't like using Camellia. Every time I use her, I don't know, just something about it feels off. Regardless, yeah, we can start to see that older characters, Camellia, I guess Camellia's kind of old at this point, as well as Jinshi, they're starting to fall down here in this list area. But we have not made it to the rock bottom yet. Let's go ahead and reveal the final characters on this list. And bam, we've got the less than 60% gang, and there are only 2 characters that unfortunately fall into this category. Those characters being Shang Li Yao as well as Yin Lin. Now perhaps if you put Yin Lin on a team where she can get carried a bit more, this might be, you know, a bit more... maybe she might be able to crawl up a tier or something. And this is also something that, you know, we discussed was, for example, You can't just slap on Originite type 4 onto Shangli Yao and then throw them on a team with like Cartethyia, Ciaccona, or Augusta, Iuno, and call it a day. So we decided to avoid, like shenanigans like that. So really we're sticking with kind of their actual teams, right? Needless to say, Shangli Yao is also a character that greatly benefits from higher skill expression as well. And same with Yin Lin. So I do think there is that to keep in mind, that this does not factor in, for example, super sweaty quick swapping, where players can definitely get more value out of these characters, as well as many of the other characters above, but definitely these two for sure can appreciate it. So yeah, a bit sad to see them down this low. Unfortunately, that's just the way Team Calcs go. They don't really care about anything besides how well do they sheet and how well do they theory craft in this case. So yeah, this is the list for example, the best S0R1 teams for each individual character and how they rank in terms of just how they compare to the best team in the game. And I've got one more bonus list for you guys, and that is which characters have the best 2 cost only teams. And the reason why I actually think this tier list is a bit helpful is because of how we need 3 to 4 fully built teams for Tower of Adversity now. So yeah, you may want to consider, which characters can kind of carry their own weight really, really well. And actually, if we set the new baseline really quick over to this right here, now we can actually see a new ranking system where the best 2 cost only team at the moment, based on, the calcs that we have so far, is Frolova, Rover Havoc, and Don Jin. So Frolova bringing her gang of, free to play friendly Havoc characters. And we can see here that this team actually does reasonably well. And for a 2 cost team in comparison to, for example, on these other top tiers, we've got the 90 to 100% gang. We've got, unsurprisingly, Frolova, Augusta, Iuno being the top dogs in terms of this. And we've got Cartethyia as well, who I do think is worth mentioning. A lot of people say, I do think personally I could round up and move her up here. You know what? I'm going to do that. I'm going to take the liberties of rounding up to move her up. Actually, no. This list is purely based on calc, so we're not going to do that. But we can definitely see a recency bias here in terms of having a single character be able to carry with Frolova, Augusta, Iuno, and Cartethyia. Although we do suffer quite a bit once we get into the next gang, which is the pretty much 80 to 90% gang. And actually, I'm a bit surprised here. We've got Phoebe and Zani neck and neck here, with Phoebe outperforming Zani by a little bit in terms of, a theoretical DPS, as well as Zani just, being right next to Phoebe, which is kind of funny to me to see. But yeah, and then we've got the next tier for the low cost gang, and we've got Gion and Carlotta, who, they're in the 70 to 80% range of the best 2 cost only team, which is reasonable, all things considered, although, of course not fantastic. And then we're hitting to the much lower tiers with Brant. If you use Brant as your main DPS character, and of course Brant is more not really a main DPS character, so it's actually pretty interesting to see him rank reasonably. Well, yeah, at this point, these are kind of the bottom 3 characters in terms of 2 cost only teams. Brant, Jinshi, and Shangli Yao. And unfortunately, we don't have calcs for all these characters in terms of 2 cost only teams, so I apologize for that. Perhaps in the future, as we get around to making more and more team calcs, we might be able to add them. But needless to say, obviously Shorekeeper is not like a low tier characters. These characters just don't have exclusive 2 cost only team calcs for them. So yeah, there you go. These are the 2 tier lists based on team calculations. And keep in mind, again, these are just purely theoretical, theory crafted rotations and teams. They are, of course, by no means 100% accurate and accounting for the average player's skill. And perhaps, maybe you can find some value out of it, whether you're trying to build a low cost team and deciding, hey, who should I pull for? Or if you're trying to pull, or you're trying to get some of the best teams in the game to clear some of the hardest stuff in the game, well, hey, we've got this list on the side for those characters that really, really excel in the situations if you are looking to invest fully into a character's team. And a link to this spreadsheet will be down in the comments below if you want to take a look at it in a bit more detail. And finally, don't forget to check out today's sponsor, Snowbreak, as they make these types of videos possible. And yeah, I mean, the update looks pretty good, if you know what I mean. As always, I appreciate every single one of you. This is I Want to Lose. signing out.